Hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Toussaint at Women in Pain Nation. And today I'm going to do a hot take interview. These are bite-sized conversations with women in pain and pain experts that speak to the lived experience of those of us with chronic pain. So today, I am going to talk with the lovely Dr. Jennifer Pierce. Dr. Pierce is many things, including she is a research investigator in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of Michigan, where I was born, yay. As a principal investigator at the university's Back and Pain Center, Dr. Pierce conducts research aimed at understanding the impact of trauma on pain phenotype and pain-related behavior. And I have to add that Dr. Pierce continues to be extremely generous to For Grace and our wonderful community of women in pain and their caregivers. And that includes doing a long interview with my partner, John Garrett, and me last year. That was a very long interview because we can't seem to let her go. And she was also a main speaker at our 2023 conference that spoke to the connection between childhood trauma and chronic pain, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So all of that being said, welcome back, Dr. Jennifer Pierce.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Dr.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. I know you're super, super busy, so I want to be mindful with your time and just dive right into this really important, critical topic for our community of women in pain. Can you just start by defining trauma?
Yeah, so trauma is a really complex term because we throw it around a lot. But when we think about trauma, we also have to think about just stressful experiences, right? So stressful events are kind of these undesirable, unexpected, uncontrollable things that happen to us that impact how we live our lives. Stress is common, even though it can really impact our lives negatively. And trauma exposure is exposure to more extreme types of trauma or extreme types of stressors. So actual or potential death, serious injury, sexual violence. And it might happen to you or it might happen to somebody that's close to you. But just this accumulation of stressors as well is important. And when we think about trauma exposure or stress exposure, you can have an acute event, something that happens a single time, like a motor vehicle collision or exposure to a natural disaster, or you can have traumatic events that are chronic, repeated, and we have a response that varies as well. So some people might experience more fear to certain experiences, might happen more often, might happen longer for certain people. So all of these things can differ. And that event is different from our response to the trauma. So people respond to traumatic events in different ways. And some of those ways might include like our attempt to survive, right? So some people might become more vigilant. Some people might become more hyperreactive to stressors in the environment. Our relationships with people might change. The way that we think about other people might change. And all of those things are the person doing their best to survive in what seems like a hostile world.
Wow, a hostile world. So I'm really interested in childhood trauma for this interview. And a child living in a hostile world does not sound very healthy. Is childhood trauma different from the definition you just gave? Or is it what you said happening as a child, like repeated stress or repeated trauma?
Trauma is trauma, but we also have this like subset with like adverse childhood experiences, which, has this list of certain events that might have happened to the child. Anybody under the age of 18, there's certain things that we think about. The CDC typically lists like 10 major events, which are like, abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect. And then we have like household dysfunction. But there's other things that researchers have started considering, such as living in a violent neighborhood or feeling lonely often, peer bullying. So there's other events that might happen to children that kind of contribute to this toxic stress that kids can experience.
Toxic stress is what we don't want, right? Because that means we're in fight or flight. Well, you're going to get to that. So, okay. So then how can childhood trauma then adversely shape our brains and our bodies? That toxic stress.
Yeah. So trauma really changes the way that we see the world. We see the world differently. And just like all of our other experiences, it shapes who we are. Your experiences, the way that you see the world is different from other people who have not experienced trauma. And it's also different from other people who have experienced a different type of traumatic event or who process their trauma differently. And when I think about kind of the brain and the response to trauma, I think about 4 different types of findings. So there's first changes to like threat appraisal and threat response. There's changes in integration. So the way that different parts of the brain talks to other parts of the brain. And then there's changes in the perception of internal symptoms that are coming from the body and also like external stimuli, how we respond to external stimuli in the environment. All of those changes seem to be adaptive. Again, these are kids that are being raised in an environment that is hostile. It's threatening. The brain is going to help you survive this hostile environment. So the individuals who have experienced trauma might then perceive other things as more threatening. There's some research that has shown that kind of that fast processing of threat in the environment, that remains intact, but we see differences in like that top-down regulation system in the brain. So things that impact our emotion regulation, our cognitive processing, all of that might be impacted. There's also changes in like sensory areas of the brain. So, and here it's really interesting because it seems like the type of trauma that people experience matters. So, for example, some research has shown that exposure to parental verbal abuse impacts like the auditory cortex. So it seems like these changes are helping, again, decrease like conscious distress, but we still have this intact threat perception. And these are like filters for our experiences. These are filters for our world. So it might make it easier to survive in this environment. We also see changes in how like these different areas are connected. So one of the really interesting areas when we think about chronic pain is the way that the insula is connected to other parts of the brain. So the insula is important for self-awareness, for understanding sensations in the body. And it's found to be much more connected to other brain regions in individuals who have experienced maltreatment. And again, the insula is important for understanding pain. And then the changes go beyond that, right? So like we're talking about the brain, but it's also associated with inflammation in the system. So we have this chronic low-level inflammation, which seems to be associated with chronic pain as well. And then that's only at the biological level. So we're not even taking into account the social, emotional, cognitive changes that happen as a result of traumatic events in childhood.
That's a lot of damage. A lot of things that can go wrong. Just a quick question. So you mentioned physical abuse. I didn't experience that, but I watched a parent abuse my other parent. Is that considered physical abuse toward the child as well?
Well, witnessing intimate partner violence is included in that list of adverse childhood experiences. So this is something that's distinct, but it's also included. It's an important form of adversity that children experience.
So then how can the damage that is done to our bodies as a result of trauma, how can it lead to chronic pain?
So we know that there's a connection. So people who have experienced trauma are more often reporting chronic pain. People who say that they have chronic pain more often report a history of trauma. So it seems like there's a connection there. And there's also multiple pathways. So it's kind of this multiple predictors can impact one pathway, chronic pain. And also one predictor, adverse childhood experiences, can lead to multiple outcomes. So you might see chronic pain, you might see other people exhibiting other physical symptoms. So it's sometimes hard to tease that apart. But when we kind of break it down, it seems that the brain, again, might show some changes in areas that underlie sensory processing, interpreting sensations both outside the body as well as inside the body. Exposure to trauma during childhood can also change the way that we respond to stressors. We might become more sensitive to stress. And trauma begets trauma. So people who have experienced trauma during childhood are more likely to experience traumatic events when they get older. So it might just be this wear and tear on the body, this allostatic load, increased systemic inflammation, which is associated with chronic pain.
Makes sense.
We might also, the changes also lead beyond that too. So it might change the way that we think about pain. So the way that we process threat in the body, because pain is threatening. Like, what does this mean? Does it mean that I'm going to be, worse off next year? Or, we don't know. So that can be very threatening. And traumatic events can change the way that we think about those stressors. And it's also associated with other symptoms that co-occur with pain, such as anxiety, depression. We have poor sleep, we have problems with cognition, and then also social relationships. So people who have experienced traumatic events more often have difficult social relationships or non-existent social relationships. So there's just this wealth of, potential pathways in which trauma might lead to chronic pain.
It all makes sense. Such good sense. I love that you stay very calm when you're talking about this. That's really great when you're talking about trauma. Yeah, it calms me. So we know that women suffer far more chronic pain than men. Is that partly due to girls experiencing more childhood trauma than little boys?
So this is kind of tough. So there's some research that suggests that girls report more adverse experiences than boys. There's some research that suggests that the types of adversity differ. So, for example, girls more often report sexual abuse, but boys also report some forms of adversity more often than girls, such as having a person in the household that was incarcerated. There might also be like patterns of differentiation. So it might be that like across age, as children get older, then we see different prevalence rates of certain types of adversity. So it's kind of hard to tease some of that apart. And it's like a very complex area of research. There's also differences in how kids respond to adversity. So there's some research that has shown that girls who experience sexual abuse more often show internalizing symptoms, whereas boys sometimes show externalizing responses. So it's hard to kind of tease that apart between boys and girls. There's also divergence in like pain across development. So girls seem to begin reporting pain more often, particularly in adolescence. So around the time of puberty. So there's likely a biological component, and how trauma fits into that, it's kind of unclear.
So we still don't know, because I have heard that little girls experience more childhood trauma than boys. And it just didn't make sense to me, but that's interesting. That's different. I'm wondering with sexual abuse, might it be possible that little girls would be more open to, or women might be more open to saying that than boys? Men?
There's definitely a cultural so men are less likely to report. Yes, absolutely, because of social norms. And so men who have experienced sexual assault may often show like very extreme responses to having experienced sexual abuse, because you have the additional component of it shouldn't happen to boys. Like, this shouldn't happen.
Right.
And I can't tell anybody. Yeah, there's shame for women, but there's like a different element for men.
Very, very interesting. So I want to just go back to leave with a positive note, talking about childhood trauma adversely affecting a child's brain and body. Is there a way to mend some of that trauma? If we do the work, can we make it better?
So I'm not a clinician. I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I will say seeking professional mental health help is always a great step forward. I also recommend the book by my mentor and colleague, Afton Hassett. So it's called Chronic Pain Reset. It's a really great book. It has some
Great
really
book.
good skill building. Yeah, some good skill building activities that might be helpful. And then beyond that, one is working on how, like, we think about the traumatic event. Is it central to your life in such a way that it's impacted how you expect things to happen in your future? Or is in because trauma is important to people. Like, people who have experienced trauma, it is important to their life history. Like, that is part of them. But in what way? Like, is it important for how you think about things in the future, or has it contributed to purpose? Has it contributed to meaning? Was it like a significant turning point in your life in like a good way? Did it lead you on a path of like purpose? But also, like, thinking about working on controlling what we can control. What can you do to improve things like sleep, getting more exercise, being more active, doing enjoyable activities? No one can go back in time and change what happened, unfortunately, but like trying to gain some sense of control about the things that you can. And then also connecting with other people who make you feel good, who love you, who support you, not the bad relationships, but social support. Good social support is really critical.
Absolutely. And we have that book in the house and we're trying to find it right now. Wonderful book by Afton Hassett, all about resilience. And give us the title again.
It's called Chronic Pain Reset. I was propping up my very good book.
I loved it. That was great. Together we did it. That was great. Chronic Pain Reset. You should read it twice, or read it and then give it to your friend. It's 30 days of activities, practices, and skills to help you thrive. Afton L. Hassett, PSYD. Please read that book and please buy it just after this interview. Thank you so much for your time. You just give me so much hope, and you give our community so much hope. And I promise I won't call you or email you for a long time.
You can anytime. I love you.
Always say no. I, from the deepest part of my heart, send you so much gratitude and love. And I just want to say, I want everybody to know, I know that you're busy raising children, your family, you're busy, you kind of have a job. I know your husband's doing wonderful things. I think you're both saving the world. So you're kind of filling in for him a bit right now. And you're deluged by campaign ads in Michigan. So you got to get back to it, Dr. Pierce. Thank you so much for making the time and helping all of us so much.
Thank you.
Much love. Oh, she's the best. And thank you everybody else for joining me on this hot take interview. And in the comment section below, I'm still laughing about the book. In the comment section below, please tell us if you're comfortable. Tell us about, and you don't have to put your name up if you don't want to, but but you didn't do anything wrong. If you suffered trauma as a child, but please tell us what you did deal with trauma-wise, and then what kind of pain are you dealing with now that maybe is a result of that childhood trauma, and how you're putting that together. And after seeing this interview, are you going to look at any kinds of trauma release methods? Because I've done it, and it's just, it will help so much. And then as we keep playing the interview, please come back and tell us how those trauma release methods are working for your mind and for your body. Okay, everybody, great interview. Thank you so much again. Cynthia Toussaint, signing off from Women in Pain Nation. So much love, and see you really soon. Bye-bye.